Welcome back to MR Realities, our regular podcast where we talk about market research around the world, some of the trends, some of the things that are happening, and what we think is likely to be happening in the near future. I'm Dave McCaughan, based in sunny, hot Bangkok, and I work on this with my good friend Kevin, who is based up in Tokyo. And today we're very lucky because we have Jenni Romaniuk from Adelaide, who is going to be talking to us all about myths and realities in the market research world. Kevin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Kevin. And rather than turn the spotlight on myself where it doesn't belong, I'll just ask Jenni to briefly introduce yourself and then lead off with anything you'd like to talk about. It's basically you're an academic and this is your area and marketing, so we'll leave it up to you.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Dave. Hi, I'm Jenni Romaniuk. I'm a research professor at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute for Marketing Science, and we're based at the University of South Australia. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, basically we are a bastion of evidence-based marketing. We go out and test to see whether or not the things we hold dear in marketing actually can stand up to evidence and scrutiny. And we've got a reputation of being a little bit controversial because, unfortunately, a lot of the things we do hold dear don't. Now, that might sound awful, but in the context of marketing science, we're still in our infancy. We've only been really doing serious marketing research for about 80-odd years. So compared to other sciences, we've still got a long way to go, and we don't find it surprising that there are things that we're learning that we might be doing wrong that we can improve on. But what we sometimes find surprising is people's reluctance to embrace evidence and take on new ideas in marketing that are evidence-based.
Is that because the scientific method is new or relatively in human history? Or is it marketing and marketing research are new compared to that? Or there's something genetic about it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a few things. I think there's a prevailing idea that marketing is a creative art rather than a science. And when you believe something is a creative art, you believe you can achieve anything if you're good enough to do it. And so there's a resistance to this idea that, no, there are actually boundaries within which we operate. We don't operate in an anything goes world. Whereas if we were talking about architecture, no one says to a person building a building, you can build it any way you want. There's no rules, nothing applies. I mean, they have these basic things like laws of gravity that they have to respect. Otherwise, the building doesn't stay up. That doesn't stop people making amazing buildings. It also doesn't stop people making really ugly ones as well. There's a lot of variety within that. But in marketing, there's this prevailing idea that we should be able to achieve anything. And another part of it is, and it's, I think, peculiar to marketing, I haven't seen this so much in other disciplines, but we have a lot of very good storytellers. And storytellers have the ability to tell a story that's believable even in the absence of evidence. And so there's a lot of ideas that are, they just catch fire because they make sense. They're inspiring. They're easy to understand. They speak to our basic humanity. It's just unfortunate they don't have any evidence to support them.
Well, I guess that's the nature of marketing. So that's a good thing in a sense, but frustrating. And I guess it also goes back to, one of the things I've often wondered. I got into sort of the marketing advertising game relatively late in life. I was about 30, having come from a public service background, and I was always amazed when I first started working at a big advertising agency that actually, there was a few people that had sort of done business at university, or some had done marketing or even done postgrad marketing degrees, but nobody had to be licensed to actually practice. And people kept on calling themselves professionals. And I kept on saying, but by definition, a profession, like a doctor, an engineer, an architect, you can't practice unless you're actually licensed to practice. Oh, no, that doesn't matter. The answer literally would be, no, that's irrelevant. You learn by experience.
Yeah,
and I
which
think
is trade.
Right, and so yes, well, in a sense, but it's always that double bind that we get ourselves into. that, well, we're not willing to commit the industry to having to be licensed to practice. But then again, I guess, if I look at, and I've, like all of us, you're constantly reading about the global warming deniers, and, I guess scientists of all type have this problem. Maybe we just have it worse because, as you say, there's a lot of people in the marketing industry that can string a line about anything. So probably,
well, in terms of marketing,
me, Kevin included, so.
Yeah, yeah, right. Stammer my way through it. But in terms of the, some of the misunderstandings or myths or things which people really strongly believe, or many do in marketing, really more or less the orthodoxy, something close to an orthodoxy. Leading off in your order of priority, what are some of the ones that are most striking, and if you could kind of spell out, what they are and why they're wrong?
Okay. Well, the most, at least top of mind for me, and most prevalent, I think, in terms of doing damage to how people do marketing, are what I call the evil twins of targeting and differentiation. And they're twins because they actually go hand in hand with each other. You usually find them next to each other and complement each other. So targeting is this idea that I have to find a small slice of the market that I'm going to own, and that's going to be the key to my success. And differentiation is I'm going to develop a product that those people will like and value so much so that they'll basically forsake all others and only buy my product, and I will have that locked in loyalty that will be the carry me through as into perpetuity as a brand. So those two twin ideas come together, and the problem with them, they sound sensible, intuitive, but if they worked, we would have a very different world of how people buy. And the one advance we have made a lot in marketing over the last 50, 60 years is we know a lot about how people buy across brands, categories, markets. I mean, and I'm not saying we couldn't know more, but we know a lot about that repertoire buying is normal, people splitting their purchases over multiple brands, that people very few people are solely loyal to any one brand. Typically, the people who are solely loyal are liked category buyers, because if you only buy a brand once a year, guess what? You're 100% loyal. You really can't be anything other than that. And so if this idea of targeting and differentiation worked, we would see a very different world when we observed consumer behavior and buyer behavior. They just don't line up. So the ideas of differentiation and targeting don't line up with the realities of how actually people buy.
Now, when you say this is heresy to many, particularly those who earn their living by complaining. You have to differentiate and you have to target. I recall the saying, no target, no brand. So when you mention this, then what kind of response do you typically get?
Okay, I want to just correct one misconception. Sure. When I'm saying no target, I'm saying no brand target. They still have category buyer target because, take the extreme of, if you're talking about hay fever medication, of course, your category buyer are people who have hay fever. There's no point in trying to get someone who doesn't have hay fever to buy your hay fever medication. So, so it's not that there's like anything goes. It's just that the target for brand A versus brand B versus brand C within that is largely the same. So when people go to the extreme, that's when they start to, and people often do that with our arguments, is they go to the straw man, the immediate, like so extreme, that of course that's not right. But actually, if they really understood it, they'd understand there's a middle ground.
Yeah, I've actually found that myth to be quite strange, because anyone who has done a UNA study, or AAU, as Americans often call it, usage and attitudes study, which collects, asks everybody about everything. Years ago, a standard crosstab would be, where you'd have a banner where you would have people who had bought brand A, B, C, whatever in the last 3 months or whatever, crosstab versus the same question. And you could see very clearly from that by and large, customers move around, and as you say, they have a repertoire. Part of it may be price-based. You have price tiers within categories and so forth. So it seems it always struck me as odd that that people would challenge anybody who had ever really done this sort of research or done very basic consumer surveys long before we had big data and all this. You would think that would have been obvious to them, or maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, I actually think a big problem is people don't get their hands dirty and get to know their data. They leap straight to the really sophisticated analysis and don't do those initial crosstabs, understanding distributions and things. I mean, because I learnt, I was fortunate enough to learn with Andrew Ehrenberg, you learn a lot about how to look at data and how to organize it before you do any analysis with it. And I just have a maxim with any new data set. I always allocate a couple of hours just to get to know it, run the frequencies, run the distributions, do a few random cross tabs to see how they interact with each other, and then work out what I'm going to do with it. And I find that even in academia, that's actually not that common. Many a time I've spoken to a very, very well-published, famous academic and asked them a basic descriptive question about their data, and they've kind of looked at me really puzzled. Even something about the degree to which something varies, which is an important part if you're modeling anything, because you can get no relationship because there is no relationship, or you can get no relationship because of the nature of the variance. So if you don't understand the variance, it's easy for any multivariate model to just be thrown out to give you misleading results. So I actually think it's a general problem, and it's getting worse because we now have bigger data sets and more complex data sets. People are skipping the basic get to know you side of it, and I think it's to the detriment of really understanding data. And the other reason also is these evil things called indices. I think we should banish indices from marketing research, because anytime you have a big indices, you have a low base. And if you have a low base, by definition, chances are it's not that important, but the indices will inflate it so that it will look more important than it really is.
Could you give an example of that?
Our media targeting is a classic one. I was actually just looking at a report that looked at the sales responsiveness from heavy brand buyers. All right. And so what it showed is the sales response from this group and as a ratio of the proportion that they were. Now, heavy brand buyers are a small part of any brand's customer base. Even big brands are predominantly light buyers. And so because of that, but they buy a lot. So if you advertise to them, they look really responsive, and you look at the ratio of how much the sales were to the people, you go, wow, these were really responsive. But it's only because A, there's a low base, and B, you chose them because they bought a lot anyway. They probably would have done that even if you hadn't advertised to them.
So in other words, yeah, if you have, I've seen examples where there's a lot of focus on ratios. As you say,
same thing.
You could have like, a click-through rate with no targeting of 1 in 1,000. And then with my special patented AI targeting, whatever, gizmo, it's double that. Okay. Well, that's 2 in 1,000. Okay. But the base
100%.
That's right. The base is like, 3 people or something, but a much smaller base. So the actual number of sales you're making, the amount of sales you're making is smaller with targeting.
Yeah. So that's the thing is, and until we get rid of that and look at real numbers, we're always going to be distracted by marginal activities, and that loses sight of the big game in marketing. And that's, so if I had my way, I'd just ban indices totally. I just would not want to see them anywhere, because I've yet to see anywhere where they add value, because you always have to anytime you have to do a double leap in thinking to get to work out whether something's valuable, you've you've gone beyond most people's capabilities to be able to do that. Because if you give me a high indices, I need more information to know whether or not that's useful. So therefore, if I need more information, the how you've presented it to me isn't useful from a data presentation point of view.
It strikes me two things, Jenny, that you're talking about. Two things that come to mind. One is, of course, the constant problem that I'm sure you counted. I know Kevin and I have talked about this before, which is, internal mythologies within an organisation. So it's extremely difficult to get companies, I've found, of any size to change things, because if they've been doing anything at all for more than 1 year, then it's automatically like internal wisdom. Well, that's the way we do it. So we have assumed that that's correct, and to change that process is almost like heresy. So, and that's partly out of respect, but a lot of the times just out of, it's just too hard to change the process.
I would beg to differ there, because I've actually seen some organisations, people within organisations make big changes, but the issue with organisations is there's lots of people in there, and very rarely is everyone moving at the same pace. And sometimes someone who might actually be onto the right things will come across stumbling blocks that make it really difficult to fully engage what it is they want to do within the organisation. But I have seen change is possible. But you have to be open to it. And this is back to the beginning of the evidence and the willingness to say that right now, as a discipline, we're in our infancy. We don't know everything. We still have a lot to learn. So everything we know should be up for scrutiny and up for, if there's evidence that can improve my thinking, then we should be, maybe I should be adopting that rather than keeping this old idea. And our marketing education doesn't help. Scott Armstrong, the professor at Wharton, wrote a wonderful paper about how marketing principles textbooks have no principles. And he did that because he went and looked through all the introductory marketing textbooks and said, where do you see that if you do X, Y will happen? That there's actually principles to act on, like you would say in other disciplines. And he found actually there were none. It was kind of just an anything goes, like, the world could look like this or it could look like that. And this is one of the things that's interested me, and particularly you guys being in Asia, when I presented this sort of research in China, often when you present an evidence-based view in China, it actually gets much easier acceptance, because most of the people there actually have a hard sciences background rather than a marketing background. So they don't have to unlearn bad ideas. They just go, so that's the evidence. That's what you're telling me. I can assess that. Okay. And so actually some of the best audiences are actually in the ones where people have not had a marketing education, which is sad.
Well, maybe it is sad, but maybe it's a good thing. I mean, in that particular case, at least, I guess it gives you eventually the more examples and cases of how organisations do take on this and learn to use it maybe more correctly.
Well, there needs to be more science in marketing and in the marketing training. I think that sorely, as Jenny pointed out at the beginning, so we like to think that it's an art and we're creative people, but there are limits to what we can do.
But the problem, Kevin, with marketing science in academia is that it's been hijacked by statisticians. And so often the marketing science discussions are not actually about science. They're actually about statistical modeling, parameters, things that, most ordinary people can't even comprehend. And so this is something that's happened to the discipline in general in academia, is you have this fracturing of, on one side, you've got all the econometricians doing all their fancy models that, with no real good validation of predictive capabilities, particularly in today's data-rich environment. And then you have the other side, which is the psychologists doing little experiments that have very fragile results that don't hold up in the real world. And so as a research institute, I think that's partly why in industry there's been such a thirst for our work, is because we show evidence that actually ordinary people can understand, and we apply it to big problems that people are facing in marketing.
I've noticed over the years a big divide between applied statisticians and academic statisticians, and particularly within the academy, you have statisticians who are interested in application. They want to roll up and get their hands dirty. Then there are those who are purely, theoretically oriented, and that could be for any number of reasons. One simply being their publish or perish incentive structure that they work under. They have to churn out. Their world is other academics, and they don't really. It's not that they don't care so much about us. It doesn't. It's just not worked into, their goals and objectives.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there's a role for that, absolutely, in academia. That's the beauty of academia. But when that becomes the bulk of the discourse, the kind of end user or the person who wants to practice marketing gets lost. They're either relying on, as I said, and there's been so much in psychology recently with failed replications, fraud, a whole range of different issues that in there, but they're relying on unreliable results on the psychology side and incomprehensible results on the statistician side. So it's no wonder that a lot of these myths that were propagated, originally developed particularly in the 50s, 60s and 70s when we didn't have a lot of data and a lot of experience, still persists today because no one's actually questioning them. I mean, it's amazing how many marketers still believe that consumers have a consideration set.
Let's step back a bit, because I'm aware that some of our audiences, I know we get a lot of students and stuff listening to some of our podcasts. So let's step back a bit. And if you could, Jenny, can you just run us through what's the Ehrenberg's basic positioning there?
Sorry.
Yeah, Dave.
I lost you.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, Jenny.
I can hear you, Kevin. I can hear you, Kevin.
Dave has been taken out of action, it looks like.
Oh,
I see him. I can't hear him. But anyway, perhaps I actually wish I could remember his the beginning part of his question.
I think he was asking about the philosophy of the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, how we do our work.
Okay, sure.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, so we do what we call a classic science approach, which is empirically based, observing the real world, replication, extension, looking for generalized empirical laws. Then once we see things repeating again and again and again, we go, oh, okay, maybe we'll spend some time working out why that happens. And at the same time, looking for boundary conditions to work out when things don't hold. So we kind of work on both sides of trying to constantly prove ourselves wrong, that there are conditions where our laws don't hold, but knowing that these empirical laws are the building blocks of theory, that once we know something will happen again and again and again, then we can start to predict it happening. And then once we can predict it happening, and then we'll see some times when maybe it doesn't happen and it fails, we can understand the conditions under which that happens, which then feeds into understanding why it happens. But we very much start with the empirical world first and use that to build theory rather than just imagining this is how the world could be and then go out and try to prove ourselves right.
Well, probably at the end, I should come back then and ask you, to give an example or two where you have proven yourself wrong, that is Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, where you've proven yourself wrong and changed your mind. But before that, maybe could you then, we talked about targeting and differentiation, which, I think obviously in some cases makes sense, but from my point of view, the way it's done and the hoopla around it kind of distracts people from doing it in the way, at least I think, is useful. But is there another myth then that you would like to discuss? There are probably quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty I can test, but I am going to disagree with you, Kevin, because I actually think the thinking is wrong. I don't think it's an execution issue. I think if you go into an idea thinking that to succeed, I need to differentiate my brand, you've already lost. Which is that's the controversy in it, but that's just what we see when we look at a whole range of different pieces of evidence coming together.
So I am back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened with the connection, but anyway, that's good. So Jenni, I often hear this. I've sat through. Obviously, I've read a lot of the stuff from Ehrenberg as an organisation, your own things and stuff. Just give us a couple of examples of what you mean by that. So, because a lot of people listening to this, a lot of people have a hard time understanding. What are you saying? We should all our brands should be exactly the same. I mean, how do you actually exemplify what that means?
Yeah, and exactly. And that's a really good example of where people go, so the reverse of what you're saying is the total opposite, which is not actually what you're saying. Is brands look different from each other. You can tell when you picked up a Coke or a Pepsi, can't you? There's no
well, yes, because if there's a brand loyalist in the world for Coke, it's me, believe me. So, yes.
Then you are a rarity, because most people who drink Coke also buy Pepsi. Most people who drink Coke also buy Diet Coke.
I do not buy Diet anything else except for full-fat Coke, and I have been many times on many planes just stuck to water because they said, when I said, can I have a Coke, they served me Pepsi and I just handed it back.
Yeah. See, and that's the thing is that, yes, everyone has one or two categories where they're a bit
we
strange.
all have, I know this. I know we all have our little, everybody has this quirky little thing, right?
Yep.
But I'm looking for the big, as you say, if you go forward, Coke versus Pepsi is an example. Go on, you were going to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, so, excuse me, my coughing's kicking in now. There's a whole range of different myths that all feed into each other. The value of segmentation. There's what people confuse segmentation with a product range. So segmentation is about dividing up people. A product range is about acknowledging that there are different reasons and needs in a category, and not one thing we offer can satisfy all of them. So we might need a portfolio of either variants under a brand name, or in some cases different brand names, to cover all of those needs. Now, those two don't have to go hand in hand. You can have a product range but go, I don't care if Kevin buys it, or Dave buys it, or Susie buys it, or Phil buys it, or whoever buys it. All I know is that when these people come into the market and the categories I'm satisfying, I've got something that they can buy where the money goes back to me as a company. So people often get caught up because they confuse these things together. So
that's an example. I use the word execution perhaps sloppily, but that's really part of what I meant. There are technical issues too that we won't have time for, but how you define a product category is another issue, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, there is actually some pretty easy ways of doing it. There's an analytical technique, the duplication of purchase, that underpins the duplication of purchase law, which is a law about brand competition, which simply states that you compete with other brands in line with their size. So the degree to which your customers will also buy another brand will depend on that size of that other brand. More of them will buy the big brands, fewer of them will buy the small brands. It's one of the laws that really explains why differentiation is not important to consumers.
What I had in mind really was something like snacks. If you're in the snack category, then you should be thinking broadly and not really, I'm a brand manager for XYZ potato chips, and I should be thinking beyond potato chips because they're competition.
Yeah, but if you want to know where do I where does the line fall down, then there are analytical techniques that can draw on empirical data that can tell you this. You don't have to. It doesn't have to be an just a decision. It can be an evidence-based decision, and there's no one right answer. Sometimes a narrower definition is going to be useful. Sometimes a broader definition is going to be useful. It also depends where you are in the market. Is it a category that's growing? Do you want to go into a subcategory that might be growing? All of those factors come in, that you don't actually have to have a one-size-fits-all definition of your category. It can adapt according to the situation that you're using, what you're using, why you need that category definition. But when we get to differentiation, this idea that somehow the brand needs to stand for something that drives people's buying, that's where what it does is it leads people to go down narrower and narrower, more obscure attributes and promote them in their advertising and things. And it kind of forgets why people are buying the category in the first place.
I've run into this actually fairly recently, where someone insisted that, you have based on say the big 5 personality types of consumers, and you need personality types of brands that match those personality types. And that's
don't get me started on brand personality. That's another fun one that I've had a few battles with. I actually have a paper with Andrew Ehrenberg in a journal called Marketing Theory that was actually published after his death. It was very great. I was very grateful that they published it, because it was one of my few pieces working with Andrew. And it just basically says people don't need to have a personality. People don't need to assign personality traits to buy. But even more interesting work is done by a New Zealander called Mark Avis, where he got people to assign personalities to rocks, basically showing people the research, the idea of just because people can assign personalities to brands in a qualitative research setting doesn't mean they really existed beforehand, and we need to, rubbish in, rubbish out with our questioning in that regard.
Yeah, I can remember, again, in my very early days in the business in the mid '80s, being astounded when I was asked in the Australian headquarters of a very large global corporation, and there's about 30 people from different organisations in this meeting, but we're all asked to anthropomorphise all sorts of things. I just, also, here's the chairs in the room. It's like, and there were different shapes of chairs, but, it was like, well, what's the personality? And I'm sitting there, what the hell are you talking about? It's a chair.
Well, but to my shame, in my frivolous youth, when I used to do focus groups, when I was much less well-informed, I have actually asked that question. If brand X was to walk in the room, what would it look like? And if you actually watch people at that moment, you see that same expression on their face, and then they kind of go and they get into this. They understand. They treat it like a game, essentially.
No, here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jenny. And I've seen this many, many, many times, right? And I actually think it gets used all the time because it is so easy for people to get into it. Because it's a basic game, and it's a bit in the way that I've never done it, but I know my wife has. I know many other people that automatically their car has a name. Like, oh, my car Claire. What are you talking about? What's it a girl? It's a car. But we do that automatically in life anyway. So I think when we ask people in focus groups or research to do it, well, they probably do it in a sense with something, their pets, whatever it is. They've anthropomorphized things that don't actually have human personalities, but it's easy to do, so.
Yeah. But they do actually give you quite logical answers. So in the case I was talking about, we were dealing with brands that actually had animal characters that they used. So of course that was the first place they went, was the animal characters. If you have a brand that for example uses a lot of females in its ad, then it will come out as feminine. But it's not that they thought it was feminine before you put lots of females in the ads. It's the fact you've got lots of females in the ads that made them think, oh, that's a more feminine brand. I've seen that empirically in personality data as well as in focus groups as well. So people don't, they do draw on their experiences of it when they're there, but they do look at you a little bit weird, like, really? Okay, if that's what you want to do,
Well, they think it's a test of some kind or a game, and it's leading into something else, which often is the case.
So where does that? Sorry, one last thing I just want to get to, because this sort of leads me down. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about the whole brand purpose thing that's been, bubbled to the surface the last couple of years, and where you sit on that.
I think a brand's purpose is to sell stuff and create the organization. I believe advertising should be to sell stuff. I'm just pretty pragmatic in that, and I'd like to see more organizations incorporate into their business models if they feel like they want to do well, rather than just turn it into a tagline or an ad campaign. So right. Things like, the CEO of Patagonia, who took the Trump tax cuts and donated it, that to me says a lot more about a brand than any of the more visible things that we're seeing happening in the world. I think I don't want to be preached at by a brand, but I do want to buy good ones. So to me, it's just like all of the other trends that have happened in branding. This too will pass. Just hope too many companies don't get distracted by it.
Do you have one last myth here? We're getting a little bit short on time that you would like to cover before we unfortunately have to sign off?
It's hard. I mean, there's a lot of bad practices, and the last bad practice I'd like to put out there, because I saw it in the Super Bowl ads a lot, and that is, don't put two brands in an ad. If you put two brands in an ad, one will win, and chances are it might not be yours. So that's just one thing that's not necessarily a myth. I mean, the reason people do it is because they think it expands the audience for it, and that, they'll get more attention. But we've done the research and it doesn't. And there's a lovely paper from one of my colleagues. I'm involved in it, but it's her core research, Kathy Nguyen, that just shows this is not the way to make your advertising more effective, and in fact it makes it less effective.
Okay, I think we could go on for some time, but we are under some time constraints here. Dave, do you have any further comments, questions? Or?
Yeah, Jenny, I finish every one of our sessions with basically the same question to everybody. The answers are varied, and we'll see how you go. The question is this: when you think back your long and storied career, or not so long, and I don't want to imply anything with age, but when you think about back across your career and all the research you've been involved in, what's the one question that you didn't ask that you wish you had?
Honestly, there are so many things I don't know that I'm still researching. I can't even answer that, because I am a great believer that, the reason I do what I do is because I want to learn. So I've learned a lot already, but still so much to learn. That's the beauty of marketing research right now, is we're in kind of the age of enlightenment where we're learning so much. So I can't narrow it down to one question. So I know it's a bit of a non-answer, but it's just because there's so many things I'm excited to learn right now that there's not enough hours in a day. So the one question I would ask, probably if I had to narrow it down, is anyone developing cloning technology such that I can have, say, 3 of me each working on a separate problem? Because I'd really like that.
Yeah, good luck with that. Okay.
Don't put it out there. There might be someone, connect with me on LinkedIn if you're in the cloning area.
No, listen, I'll guarantee you in the back blocks of somewhere.
Well, we need cloning. I've tried that. It takes too much time. You need replication.
Okay.
You got to get all your experiences, everything. We need an exact replicate of.
Yes, yeah, exactly. If we can do that, even better. I'm method agnostic, shall we say?
The question that I've talked to a couple of science fiction writers about this sort of area, right? Serious science fiction writers, and of course the thing is that the way they look at it is, but if you came up with 2 exact replicas of Jenny, what would be the advantage? Because you'd all be asking exactly the same questions in exactly the same way, all the time and interpreting the answers in exactly the same way.
But see, my issue is time. So
yeah, I know. But the point is, if there was 3 of you, you would do everything exactly the same. So
that's an assumption.
Well, but that's their assumption that they, people that have put some thought into this, not me, because I'm too dumb to think about stuff like this. Right? So, okay. Anyway, listen, Jenni, we could go on forever. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much. I really encourage people listening to this to go back. My thing as we got ready for this was a reminder to me that I've sat through an awful lot of sessions where, not you necessarily, Jenni, but other members of the faculty there at Ehrenberg have stood in front of conferences, and people have sat there, wow, that was really great. That was really great. And when I check back a year later, well, no, I didn't read any of their stuff. And so I would really encourage people to go and do a little digging around and find some of the stuff you've written and just spend a few hours having a look at it and thinking and reading a little bit harder about some of these issues.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, it's just not, I mean, would you, it's the golden rule. Would you want someone to criticize something you've written when they haven't read it? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And I do sense there's a lot of that. There's a lot of kind of word of mouth going around about, various schools within marketing, right? That have no substantiation. It's just, it's kind of, it's hearsay, basically. I've heard, for example, that you folks don't believe in brand loyalty at all.
Yeah, which is not true.
Which is not true.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing is there's a lot of what I don't say is a straw man argument where people take it such to the extreme that you go, that doesn't make any sense. And of course, I'm not going to agree with that because you've taken it so far to the extreme without really understanding. As I say, add a bit of sophistication to your argument if possible, please.
I think that's it. It's really, it's a question, really a degree, not really, the category so much that you don't believe. So many of the things about marketing, I think, that get in the way, and make it fun, but at the same time, it can raise a lot of eyebrows and waste a lot of money, is that we go too far. We get too hyped up. And it gets to the point where if something really sounds great and you're really sold on the idea, then it becomes part of our reality. Even as you've pointed out at the outset and several times, that there's no actual empirical evidence to support that view.
And a lot to refute it.
Yeah.
And a lot to refute it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks to you both. And, I just wish we could go on and on and on, but there are human limitations. Maybe perhaps one day you'll be able to come back and we can pick up where we left off or start off with some new thread. But thank you very much.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.